Welcome to the AskALLi member Q&A broadcast. It is April 2018, and I am your host, Michael Ronn, and I'm joined with Dan Blank from We Grow Media. How are you, Dan?
Very well, thank you.
Great. So we're back with another episode, and we've got a lot of questions to answer here, so we'll get through them. But we just wanted to take a minute to ask everyone, if you've been listening to the show, Dan and I have been doing this for a few months now, and if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast network of choice. So iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcast. We're even on YouTube if you like to watch your podcast. We just would really love to expand ALLi's reach and ALLi's network. And so we've got some great shows on the network along with this show. So if you like what you hear, we ask that you please subscribe. So let's jump into our questions.
All right, we got a whole bunch today. So the first one is from Kathleen. And she's saying, my book is in manuscript form. I would like to get book reviews before printing. I understand the national reviewers will look at well-established authors' books. Is there any reason why I shouldn't attempt to query anyway? She was saying they will only look at well-established authors' books. Her book is a how-to for parents to prepare their child for success in school. How would I find reviewers familiar with parents in education whose reviews would be beneficial by showing their review in my book? So she's looking for early reviews by what seems like reputable sources, I would say.
Okay, so there are a couple questions here, and from what I'm hearing. So the first is, should I attempt to query a book reviewer even if I know they won't accept me? So to answer that, this particular venue, I'm not very familiar with them, but it sounds like it might not be a potentially good fit for what you're writing and what you're trying to accomplish. That being said, all they can do is say no. If there's a monetary cost associated with it, it's probably not a good fit, but sometimes you never know what they're looking for and what your actual chances are until you do it. And we are writers, and so we have to be able to be comfortable with rejection. So, I if there's no cost or anything like that in submitting it, I don't know that it would hurt you, but know that that might not be the greatest fit for, what they're looking for. If they're looking for, quote, established authors, they may not be too open to indies. And so the second part of this question is, how do I find an audience for a how-to parenting book? And I love this. I love this niche because it just seems like with parenting, it just seems like anything's possible with it. So you read stories in the news and you read articles on blogs about parenting and how products can just kind of take off with the word of mouth. And so if I were going to be finding an educational market, and this is just Michael Ron's opinion only, it seems like word of mouth would be the best route. I would start with moms first and foremost. If you're going to do anything with parenting, I would try to get that book into as many moms' hands as you can. And if they like it, that alone might be enough. But maybe some other ideas. You could repurpose the content of the book into shareable pins on Pinterest. You could do some Facebook Live videos with moms that have, read your book and have used it to great success. Or you could even get some testimonials from prominent educators in the community. I think you've got some really good marketing options available, and maybe more so than most nonfiction audiences. So I would get creative and don't be afraid to try something different.
I'll just kind of add on to that because I love your answers. I think something I worry a lot about with authors is spinning your wheels. So there are so many things an author can be doing. If you are trying to get a review from places that state that they rarely review books like yours, or at the stage that yours is at, it's not that you can't. It's not that luck might not happen. It's I worry that it will take up a lot of time to figure it out, to submit it, and that it's like a 1% chance. So that's something I look at with all kinds of things with authors. Where are you spinning your wheels? For Michael's other wonderful advice, sometimes I've seen, especially in the parenting niche, authors say, I'm going to go out mommy bloggers. And if you ever really dig into that niche, what you find is this is a very mature market of parenting blogs. Most of them will have some kind of statements about what they accept, how they accept it. And I would just encourage you, and I think Michael said this, but I'm not quite sure, was even just going to any parents, going to PTA, going to, parenting Facebook groups for your local community, talking to teachers, talking to parents, not as the end goal, but as a starting point to start learning about getting blurbs for the book, finding out what they like about it. You can start putting testimonials on your website about your work that are just parents or teachers or librarians or administrators. And then as you get it out there more, maybe you'll find more and more credible sources that'll have like a byline that you find more impressive.
Awesome.
All right, so next question is from David. He's saying, what can you tell me about Babelcube? I've arranged for 3 of my books to be translated by his translators. I'm uncertain how the translated books will be published and distributed.
Okay, so the question is Babelcube a good service for authors looking to translate their works into foreign languages? So for those of you who don't know who Babelcube is a service that they provide. It's more of a portal. So it's a place where you can find translators who will translate your work on a royalty share. And Babelcube will then distribute the translation to places like iTunes, Apple, and then a lot of other foreign markets where you can, where foreign readers or international readers can download and purchase your translation. And so what's really cool about Babelcube is they've got some really cool technology to where it's really simple. I mean, you can contact the translator. The translator, can make you an offer on your book, and then they've got this system where it automatically formats your stuff, and it's really sleek. And you can do ebooks, you can do paperbacks, and I have nothing but good things to say about the platform itself. I have used it for a few of my books, and as much as I did like the service, the sales didn't pan out as much as I wanted them to, and I don't know that that's a fault of Babelcube. I wonder if it's just the fact that the market isn't there yet. So that being said, I haven't made a whole lot of money there, and it's really going to depend on which language you're getting your book translated into, the market, and also how willing and how able your narrator is going to be able to be involved in your marketing, because I think the ultimate success of any translation is going to depend on the narrator, because you're going to want someone translating your book who knows the market and who knows the different channels in which they can get your book in, because it's really hard for you as an author if you don't know the language, if you don't know the culture. And so if you're going to use Babelcube, which I recommend that people definitely check out and take a look at and see if it's right for your career, just make sure you're willing to invest in finding the right narrator, and that you're willing to hire an independent editor and all of that, and still treat it like it's a book that you're doing in English, and maybe it can yield some good investments for you. But as I found, maybe I've just been a little bit too early to the market.
All right. The next question is, can we get a quick update on Kindle Scout? It is not accepting new submissions.
Yes. So in our last episode, the question came up is Kindle Scout worth it? And we answered as of, I don't remember what the date was, but it might have been like April 2nd or something. We said, yeah, it's still open for business. You can still use it if you want, make sure it's right for your career. And then before we recorded this episode, they came out and said they're no longer accepting submissions. Want, want. So we just wanted to make sure we updated that, because we never know when people are going to be listening to this, that Kindle Scout is now defunct. I think they're going to continue going through the current submissions that are currently on the website. But after that, I would not count on them being around much longer.
All right. This is another question from Facebook. And they're asking, if you have a title up for pre-order, do you see pre-orders in your dashboard, or do you only get to see them as sales when the book goes live? So once the book is published.
Okay. And I'm assuming this is for Amazon, because it's going to be a little bit different for the other retailers. And yeah, if I remember this correctly, and I should know this by the back of my hand, because I'm in the Amazon dashboard like 10,000 times every day. But pre-orders are counted on a separate tab on the KDP dashboard until the release. So there should be a separate tab where you can see your pre-orders. On the day of the release, you will actually see all of your pre-orders show up on the normal dashboard. And what Amazon does, and it's kind of a weird quirk, they will come from a reporting standpoint, they will compile all of your pre-orders on the day of the launch. So if you had 50 pre-orders during, a 90-day pre-order launch period, on launch day, you're going to see 90 sales on that day one. However, that 90 sales does not count towards your ranking. During the pre-order period, as people order your book, the books then count towards your sales rank. So it's a little strange, but they're counted on the pre-order tab until launch, and then after launch, you will see them on your regular sales dashboard.
All right. Next question is another one from Facebook. The question is it possible to have a separate author page for each pen name that you have? But the way they asked it was also a little interesting. They said, can you shed any light on the easiest way to approach having a separate author page for your fiction versus nonfiction? So I'm not sure if the question is I have a pen name, or I just have one name, but I have a whole fiction series and a nonfiction series.
Okay. And I'll give the Amazon answer for this. So you can only have one Amazon account. That to have multiple Amazon accounts is against the KDP terms of service. So you can have multiple Amazon author pages, though. So, for example, I have multiple Amazon author pages. I have my Michael Ronn science fiction fantasy pen name, and then I have ML Ronn, which is what I write my nonfiction under. That's a separate Amazon page. So you are able to create separate Amazon pages. The technical nuts and bolts of how to do that, I don't know if it's worth going into on this podcast, but just know that you can only have one KDP account, but you can have as many author pages for as many pen names as you have.
All right. Next question is from Edward. Basically says, should I use a female pen name for writing romance?
Okay. So I actually had to think long and hard about this one, Edward, because we did a question last month that basically said, should you use a pen name? and I think Dan and I both agreed that a pen name can be useful. This one is a little bit different, though, because romance is a genre that is primarily dominated by women. And so I would have a couple of backup or follow-up questions to you, which basically would be, what are you wanting to achieve from writing romance? I'm assuming that you're writing something else and then you're coming into romance, but I could be wrong. But it depends on the level of interaction you want to have with your readers, right? So I personally, and this is just my opinion, I think that if you're going to be 100% invisible, you don't want to have any interactions with your readers. You're not going to make any public appearances. You're not going to do interviews. All you're going to do is just write romance and make money from it. I don't think it's not going to hurt you to use a female pen name, but I think most people would probably want some level of interaction with their fans. And so to use a female name might be a little bit deceiving to readers when they do find out who you are. So it might be better to go with a neutral name, like with initials, or a name that maybe is kind of unisex. So that way you're not deceiving readers. I think that's really important just from a building trust perspective. You never want to have a reader pick up your book thinking that you're somebody, and then they put it down and like, oh, wait, who is this person again? It's just probably not the way you want to go. So, but it depends on, like I said, depends on the level of involvement that you want. But I will say that there is something to be said for blending in a little bit in those genres, like romance or like military sci-fi, for example, where it's primarily dominated by men, just because readers do have sometimes the preconceived ideas, and there are people do have biases when they're looking at books and book covers. And so like I said, there is something to be said about blending in a little bit, but you just want to make sure you're not deceiving the reader.
All right. So we have one final question. This is the one I think we're going to dig into. The summary of the question, it's from Joss, is how much plot and detail should I include in my author bio and book description? And they provided quite a bit of context to this. I'm not sure if you want to dig into their context too much for the question, though.
Yeah, I believe... Yeah, we won't dig into the context too much, but the spirit of the question really is, Jazz was wrestling with, do I divulge too much of the story in the bio and in the book description because I feel like it's important, or do I not and risk, readers not understanding what the book is and not picking it up? I think a lot of authors have this struggle, which is why we picked this question.
Yeah. So I know in the gist of their questions, this idea that there's a 2-book memoir, but there's a surprise. And, do I talk about my story in the bio? But if I do that, I might ruin this main surprise. And I think that one thing I like to keep in mind here is the idea that the book, the work of art, is sort of this perfect form. And that exists related to, but separate from you and how you engage with readers, how you engage with anyone who might like this book. So for almost anything, you have to think about what would draw someone to this book. How am I signaling to people, this is what I'm about? If you hide all of that, it begs this question of how on earth will people find your book? How can you market it if you're hiding some of the core issues that are discussed in it? And even thinking about word of mouth, how will people talk about this book when you don't have that kind of control? What kinds of things would they want to say? And I suppose something I think about a lot recently is movie trailers have this problem. I've stopped watching movie trailers permanently, or for now, because I found that they've gotten too spoiler-y. And I do agree with Joss that you don't want to give away too much. I've got a lot to dig into here, but I want to get your kind of initial take on it as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I have this thing with movie trailers too, where I get angry when I see them. However, they do work in the sense that they build the suspense and they build the emotion. And there's very little. There are some spoilers, right? But if you think about it as a movie trailer, maybe that might be a little helpful. That will be my counter to that, just because I do think that with your bio and your book description, you want to be salesy. You want to be 90% selling, 10% plot. And so I think that if you think about it like that, if you think about what's that have you ever seen that YouTube video, 5 Guys in a Limo, where it's all the famous movie narrators, the guys that have done all the famous movies that we all know and love, and they kind of get into a limo, and so they're all narrating in their voices, and it's just all this huge build up to them going to the Oscars. Just Google that video, and you can kind of get a sense of kind of what I'm talking about. Like that's the kind of tone and attitude that you want to go for your trailer. But I don't know. I agree. I'm kind of sick of movie trailers today, but I think they can be instructive.
Yeah. Gosh, I'd love to have a whole podcast with you about movie trailers. So I guess I would separate two here, because the question also asks about book description and author bio. And one thing I'd consider is that if you're writing a book, if you're publishing books, I want to remove us also from that idea of launch day. Because inherently, if you are a writer and you're sharing this story, there are discussions you want to be having. You want to be talking to people about these issues. You want them to be talking. You might want to be speaking. And that could be big keynote speaking, or it could be, no. I want to go into, schools and have conversations. I want to help people who are struggling with issues that I had. And we can think about any, very famous memoirs like Wild or Eat, Pray, Love or whatever. There are so many out there that have become so big. And one thing I want to think about is the kinds of conversations you want to have. And there is a distinction between the idea of reading the book Wild and hearing an interview with Cheryl, or talking about issues that have come up through her story that resonate with the readers. So I would maybe get clear about that as well. As a human being, these works are these kind of perfect art. But around that, well after launch, you're probably going to want to be talking with people about these topics. You want to be moved or maybe changed or helped by it. And when you're clear about that, I think that helps you write not the book description, but the author bio. And that's something I think is critically important. If you look at something like website data for an author website, one of the most popular pages on the whole site is always the About page. You think about how someone hears about an author, they hear about the book, or they hear about you through word of mouth. They check you out, and the first thing they want to know is either about your work of art, your book, or they want to know about you. So it is an opportunity to draw them in. And if you keep that blank, it's literally like, your friend saying, Michael, come over here. I want to meet my friend Bob. And Bob just stares at them and just says nothing. And Michael's like, all right, Bob, catch you later. So if you keep it empty, if you keep it cryptic, if you make it really short, you're sort of closing this door. And I worry about that for any author.
No, I love that. And I love that you brought up about pages because I had that on my list of things to talk about because you, Dan, have an amazing about page. We talked about this a little bit last month, but when I first met you, I read that about page and I've never seen one that looks quite like that. We'll make sure that we drop a link to it in the show notes. Talk a little bit about that. And can you talk about what it looks like, kind of
Yeah.
how you came up with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I work with a lot of authors on. I have a book, Be the Gateway. There's a whole section on this in there. And I have some theories about what an about page should be. So for me, I'll talk about it a little broadly so maybe the authors can have some tips from it. I often think that on your website, the about page should be first person. You should be talking directly to the reader. You may need on that about page a section that's for the media. You know, if you're speaking at a literary festival, if you're being interviewed, you can have a third person bio there for them to copy and paste. But otherwise, talk to the reader. The other thing I like to do on my page and what I recommend for authors is flip it. Typically, people start at the beginning. You know, I was born in Howell, New Jersey, and I started writing when I was 4 years old. And I have a Southern accent now because I'm like reading someone else's bio. And they want to build. And I ask people to flip it. Start with where people are now. Because if they're reading your about page, they're looking for a reason. There's so much in their life that can take them away. So start with like, you know, I write memoirs that blah, 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 blah. And, you know, talk about, grab the reader with the thing you know that your work would resonate with them. And kind of work backwards. Have that quick blurb to kind of draw them in. Talk about why you write this. So why is this interesting? Why is this important? Then give some credentials. That's when you can say, well, I came to this because, and all the reasons, all the research you've done, or that what you've lived through, or where you've studied, whatever that is. And I think there's a big opportunity here for authors to kind of filter their life. And there's a lot of examples I can give here, but oftentimes, let's say you have like a mystery author, but really they spent 30 years being an accountant. So what they think is like, well, no one wants to hear that, so I'll hide that. And I think that you want to consider, how does it create a narrative? Maybe you can say, you know, I spent 30 years as an accountant, and what it taught me was that the truth is always hidden in the numbers. And in my mysteries, I find that, and you sort of pull something out of that. You know, you give a narrative to how your life built to you being this perfect mystery author. And then finally, I think then you can go deeper. People can stop scrolling at any point. They can read that first sentence. And I forget exactly what it is on my site, but I try to talk about what I do and why I do it, how it's helpful. I go into my credentials, but then beneath that is just who I am. So I talk about my entire history of writing and of art and the projects I've had. I pull in these old photos from when I was like 19 and I was in my 20s doing different creative projects. I talk about volunteer work I've done. And the idea is that if you've got a little bit of time as a reader, you can just read the first paragraph. And if you're drawn in, it'll go deeper. And if you stop reading at paragraph 5, that's fine. You don't have to keep reading to paragraph 12. But if you do, you'll learn more about me. And the goal is that you resonate with who I am as a person. You understand the work I do, and then you understand how we can connect with each other.
Yeah, no, I love all of that because, and to tie it back to this question, I think that maybe it would be helpful, Joz, if you started with a lot of this work first. So with a lot of this personal story, with a lot of the personal branding of what's in it for the readers and what's that value proposition that you can give to those memoir readers? You know, where do you fit in terms of the memoir genre? What kind of story do you have to tell? And then build up some sort of a kit for the media, build up some talking points, build up, you know, what you would say to someone if they came to you and asked you what your books are about. And then take that bits and pieces and incorporate that into your book description. I think that would be helpful. I also think bullet points is not a bad thing. Right now, it seems like with a lot of nonfiction, I see a lot of bullet points. So I see, you know, a lead in paragraph, and then what you're going to learn or what you're going to get out of this. And if you can condense that into a couple of bullet points, that also might help because the people will be able to see, okay, what is it that I'm getting from this story? And if you can really marry that with some really strong personal branding, I think that will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
I think for memoir too, you can start getting away, and we've got a couple minutes left, I know, Michael, so I'll just kind of give that flag here. Is you can think about your actual story, but also how it leads to these things that you believe. So you don't have to give away your story. You can say things like, I believe you have to live your truth. I believe sometimes you have to fight against, things are wrong. You can kind of generalize it to these belief statements in your bio, where you can then begin talking to people, representing yourself by these without actually saying, and I believe it because here's a spoiler from my book. So you can think about how your story becomes other people's stories. And this is something I found with so many memoir authors I've talked to. When they share their story, my book is about overcoming cancer and this and that. Inherently, they talk to the reader about their experience. And it's a very emotional connection because it's obviously based on truth. It's based on real life experience.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think that nonfiction authors really have, this is almost essential. I mean, it's a core element of nonfiction writing. You have to get this right in order to move to that next level. Whereas I think fiction authors, you don't necessarily have to get this right in the beginning. It's more about the story. But I think if you can get it right in the long run, it will help you. But with nonfiction, it's super important because people are not only just buying the story, they're buying into you, right? And so you have to make sure that you are a compelling story and a compelling thing worth buying. And I think a lot of people struggle with that a little bit. And I think the sooner you can do that work and make sure that you have all that correct, it'll pay off dividends in the future. All right, so we're coming to the end of this episode. So a couple of public service announcements. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube, podcast app of choice or YouTube. We would love to have you every month and also to have you join in with our other shows on the network. So be sure to subscribe. And also, we wanted to let you guys know that our next self-publishing advice conference is on April 14th, 2018, and we're calling it SpaCon. So it used to be called the Indie Author Fringe, but we're calling it SpaCon, which is the Self-Publishing Advice Conference, and it's 3 times a year. It's an online conference for self-publishing authors brought to you by the Alliance of Independent Authors, and it's fringe to the major global publishing fairs. So the London Book Fair is the 10th to 12th of April, 2018. So our conference is going to be on the 14th. And we're going to bring together the most up-to-date self-publishing information and education, and we're going to broadcast it to everyone everywhere. So if you've never participated, it's 24 hours worth of content. So you don't have to be there for the whole 24 hours. You don't have to stay up for 24 hours. It'll be available forever. But we start I think it's early in the morning, and every hour we have a new speaker come on and do something a little bit different. So it's really cool. I've participated in it in the past, and if you've never been part of our conference, we invite you to join us on April 14th. And if you are an ALLi member, look for an email from Orna here pretty soon that will have additional details on it. And if you're not an ALLi member, be sure to join us. You don't have to be a member to join the self-publishing conference. It's free to everyone, but certainly we would love to have you as a member of ALLi as well. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude this episode, and we will see you next month with more questions.